Every trend in interior design is a statement about who we are at our core, and the place that we're most comfortable and most able to be ourselves. But sometimes it's less about our taste and more of a performance, especially in modern society. It's about putting on a show for others of who you want them to think that you are. There's nothing inherently wrong with this, but I wanted to do a deep dive into interior design trends and the psychology behind them. What do these pieces of furniture or these colors say about us as a society, and how do aesthetics tie into status signaling? Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is GraceLuberto. I am your Gen Z real estate agent on the Emerald Coast. And today, like I said, we're going to be looking into interior design trends throughout the past century. I wanted to analyze each one individually and look at exactly how they reflect where society was at the time, the general attitudes and beliefs that people held, and how that reflected in their homes. So let's get into it. Section 1, the history of tastes. What I really want to do first is look back at each decade and really analyze it, dissect the designs that came out of each one and how they all influenced each other to get to where we are today. So let's start with the Victorian era. This is where maximalism was first really introduced. It was a time where royalty was regarded very highly, so the more that you could show off your wealth, the better that you looked to everyone around you. People bought tons of interior decor, often very mismatched or eclectic. People filled rooms with whatever looked lavish just to prove that they could, just to show that they had the expendable income to do so. They would blend a lot of different historical styles and even some from different countries and cultures. There was also a lot of clashing patterns. Even the houses themselves were very intricate in their designs, with a lot of heavy carving and decorative detailing. Now let's look at the 1920s, or the Roaring Twenties. This was a very big period for design, and we still see a lot of these influences today. During this period, World War I had just ended, and so did the 1918 influenza outbreak, so there was definitely a lot of optimism in the country. There was a sense amongst Americans that the worst was behind them. This is where Art Deco took hold, a style that wasn't rooted in one tradition as much as a shared love of modernity. Designers at this time wanted houses to feel very new, fast, and forward-looking, just like the attitude of many at the time. Furniture and decor began borrowing visual language from the technology that was growing around them. Things like skyscrapers, automobiles, radios with invisible waves, jazz clubs, and movies flickering on screen for the first time. Interior design at the time was very industrial, so there were a lot of sleek lines, symmetry, and geometric patterns. One of the most recognizable motifs from this time was the starburst. It mirrored a lot of that fascination with electricity, radio waves, and even energy itself. In the home, there were a lot of colors like deep reds, bold yellows, blues, and purples, often paired with chrome or silver finishes. This contrast was much like the drama and luxury of jazz clubs at the time, and the bold color experiments happening in art as well. Another really big design movement happening at the time was Bauhaus. Bela Lugosi's dead. Originating from Germany. Bauhaus designers believed that objects should be beautiful but also practical. Their guiding rule was form should follow function. Furniture was stripped down to its essentials. Tables and chairs were reduced to basic geometric forms. Materials like steel, glass, plywood, and early plastics, while unusual at the time, were embraced because they were practical and suitable for mass production. Their goal was to make good designs available to everyone, and not just the wealthy. But the 1920s were also the jazz age. People at this time loved glamour. They wanted this richness in their lives, which gave way to things like leather upholstery, mirrored surfaces, and shiny finishes. In the 1930s, all of this optimism came to a grinding halt. In 1929, the stock market crashed and brought on the Great Depression. At its worst, nearly a quarter of the workforce was unemployed. Interior design became restrained because people just couldn't afford to have excess. A lot of people sold their extra decorations or furniture just so that they could pay for their house. Homes became simpler, quieter, and more practical. Furniture purchases slowed dramatically. Rooms felt more open because people just owned less. Walls were often left bare with minimal art or decoration. To compensate, families used floral or striped wallpaper and patterned rugs to bring some level of visual interest. Color palettes softened as well. There were a lot of neutrals and gentle pastels that contrasted the colors of the previous decade. These offered a sense of calm during a very anxious time for many. One object that became the emotional center of the home was the radio. The 1930s were the golden age for radio. A lot of living rooms at the time centered around a family radio cabinet, much like a TV cabinet in later decades. This radio provided a lot for families at the time. It was their connection, their news, their entertainment, and their comfort. The 1940s were defined almost entirely by World War II. Resources, labor, and industrial power were all redirected toward the war effort. For the time being, innovation and interior design stalled. Factories that once produced furniture were now making tanks, planes, and ammunition. Consumer goods were scarce, and the design industry just went silent. Then in 1945, when soldiers returned home, they were ready to start families, so the housing market had to adapt to accommodate that. Marriage rates soared, families grew, and housing construction exploded to meet that demand. Because factories were still transitioning back to consumer goods, and resources like steel were limited, a lot of houses were built very small and affordably. Most late 1940s houses averaged under 1,000 square feet and only had 2 bedrooms, and wood was the main material used. Knotty pine paneling appeared in almost every room and on every wall at that. Dark wood furniture was also very common, partly because it was what existed before the war and also because it was a very calm and comforting color after years of fighting and stress. The kitchens started to modernize at this time. Influenced by Bauhaus ideas of efficiency, kitchens began featuring built-in cabinets, linoleum floors, long countertops, and electric appliances. The focus was on function and cleanliness. Overall, the 1940s were transitional. Most Americans lived in modest homes while they waited for things to get better. And in the 1950s, they did. The future was incredibly bright. The U.S. emerged from the war as an economic powerhouse. Wages rose, unemployment dropped, and consumer spending splurged. Americans wanted houses, cars, furniture, families, and the baby boom brought on nearly 37 million children just in this decade. The suburbs were also rapidly expanding, fueled by highways and new developments far from city centers. Ranch-style homes in mid-century modern design became the most common style. A lot of bright colors also reflected the optimism that people felt. There was turquoise, coral, mint green, light blue, yellow, and pink. Every room of the house was very bright and colorful, and homes felt futuristic. Modernism became mainstream. Furniture was still being influenced by Bauhaus design and creators, and these entered into middle-class homes. Scandinavian design gained a lot of popularity too, with a lot of light woods and organic shapes becoming prominent. Homes felt more open, with bigger floor plans and large windows that connected the outdoor spaces to the indoors. Patios turned into leisure spaces for the middle class, and people began focusing on outdoor entertaining. By the end of the decade, average home sizes had grown by more than a third. The 1950s were also influenced by the space race that was going on at the time. There were a lot of atomic age motifs like the starburst mentioned earlier, as well as boomerangs and abstract shapes. These appeared on furniture, barware, clocks, and lamps. And this showed a lot of the fascination that people had with rockets and the future. Then the 1960s brought on a lot of change, socially, politically, and culturally. Civil rights activism, the women's movement, the sexual revolution, and youth rebellion all helped to reshape American identity. Interior design followed suit, becoming bolder, louder, and more personal. This decade marked a shift towards self-expression. Homes reflected more individual taste rather than strict rules. Psychedelic colors like fuchsia, tangerine, neon orange, and bright green appeared with paisley prints and experimental lighting like lava lamps. To accommodate for growing families, houses got larger, nearing 1,500 square feet. Interiors felt very airy, with things like open shelving and floating staircases. New materials also played a major role. Lucite, fiberglass, and colored plastics became popular because they were modern, affordable, and easy to mass produce. Furniture was seen as temporary because it was made to be thrown out and replaced when it was no longer in style. Sound familiar? Matching furniture sets also became a status symbol. It signaled that you were financially secure because you could afford to buy an entire room's worth of furniture at once. At the same time, counterculture movements like the opposition to the Vietnam War inspired a lot of global influence. Moroccan and Indian patterns, floral motifs, and bold textiles inspired by peace movement aesthetics entered interior design. The 1970s were called the Me Decade, and interior design reflected a more inward focus on oneself. Economic instability, the energy crisis, inflation, environmental disasters, and the end of the Vietnam War created widespread uncertainty. Americans began rejecting machines and futuristic ideals and instead turned toward nature and nostalgia. Homes filled with plants and earth tones took over. Natural materials like wicker, stone, and wood became staples. Maximalism replaced the clean lines of modernism. This was also when a lot of shag carpets and wicker furniture was introduced, as well as the iconic avocado green appliances in the kitchen. Despite the mostly earthy vibe, there were still some bright flashes of glamour thanks to the disco movement. Chrome accents and mirrored surfaces added shine to otherwise organic spaces. Then the 1980s fully embraced maximalism and excess. Fueled by economic confidence, consumer culture, and media like MTV, interior design became bold, eclectic, and theatrical. Decoration exploded. Color palette shifted dramatically, with pastels inspired by Miami Vice merging with rich jewel tones and bold primary colors. Memphis design, a postmodern movement from Italy, challenged everything that modernism stood for. It favored whimsy, exaggerated shapes, and decoration over function. Homes featured playful, almost surreal objects. There were a lot of zigzag patterns, neon accents, and sculptural furniture. Houses grew larger too, averaging almost 2,000 square feet by the end of the decade. Open kitchens became popular too and were designed for family interaction rather than isolation. After decades of visual overload, the 1990s sought restraint and minimalism returned. Influenced by grunge culture, the early internet, and Pacific Northwest aesthetics, color palettes softened. Young people thrifted and repurposed items, leading to the rise of shabby chic. Rather than buying entire matching sets, homeowners curated their spaces from flea markets and secondhand finds, and walls became canvases for texture. There were a lot of faux finishes, sponge painting, and stenciling that turned drywall into surfaces made to look aged or handmade. Then as the internet became a part of daily life, homes expanded dramatically in the early 2000s. Suburbs filled with McMansions averaging over 2,300 square feet. There were open floor plans, high ceilings, bonus rooms, and even home theaters became standard. Kitchens grew into social hubs. Islands became essential, and stainless steel appliances took over. The material's sleek, futuristic appearance, as well as the shifting gender roles in the kitchen, helped to drive that popularity. After moments like Y2K, 9/11, and the Great Recession, interiors leaned warm and comforting. There were a lot of soft neutrals, deep reds, browns, and golds that reflected a desire for safety and stability. By the 2010s, technology was everywhere, and sometimes too much so. Smart homes emerged, complete with app-controlled lighting and temperature. Instagram reshaped how people designed their homes, turning interiors into curated backdrops for online life. HGTV and shows like Fixer Upper also dramatically drove the popularity of the modern farmhouse aesthetic. It brought white walls, shiplap, subway tile, and open shelving into the mainstream. And at the same time, mid-century modern came back too. We saw the rise of houseplants again too, especially among millennials who delayed traditional milestones and found fulfillment in nurturing their own spaces instead. And home sizes continued to grow, driven by low interest rates and multi-generational living. And this brings us to now, the 2020s. Maximalism is definitely back, but it's a lot different. Color is a big focal point with a lot of blues, greens, and warm pastels. A lot of traditional elements have returned too, like florals, wallpapers, and layered patterns. But minimalism has also been popular lately, especially with things like the clean girl aesthetic. I feel like now, with the internet being so prominent, that individual style shows through more than any one specific style. You have so many different styles being shown online that it's so much easier to actually find something that you're drawn to and be able to recreate it on your own than have one cohesive style representing the whole generation. However, things like global instability, a pandemic, inflation, and climate anxiety have all shifted priorities for Gen Z. Thrifting is huge right now, and a lot of Gen Z is opting for thrifted, vintage, or upcycled pieces instead. Design is still responding to the current state of the country and the world at large. Section 2, the psychology of aesthetic signaling. Now let's talk about status signaling theory, or conspicuous consumption. Status signaling theory describes how people use luxury goods or curated lifestyles to attempt to communicate a higher social status to other people. You see this in people buying things like designer clothes, expensive watches, luxury cars, or even niche artisanal products as a way to show off their wealth and refined tastes. Modern status signaling is a lot different than it used to be, and it shows up more in lifestyle choices. So leisure activities like exotic traveling or exclusive events, or even achievements like prestigious degrees and awards can all be a way to communicate status and wealth. And houses have definitely become a marker of social identity as well. We see these curated lifestyles show through on social media with people whose whole lives and homes look aesthetically pleasing. And what's worse is with taste policing on social media, a lot of people who earn less will end up spending a larger portion of their income on these aesthetic markers. It's not necessarily because they're shallow, but in today's online world, class identity is socially enforced, and there's a lot more incentive to be seen as higher class. Even when looking at rooms that on the surface look very individual and personalized, there's still a level of status signaling when it all looks very cohesive and aesthetic, when in reality, not every room has to look like it belongs on Pinterest. This pressure to meet an algorithmic standard of good taste is deeply psychological. When you look at interior design through the lenses of history and psychology, it becomes clear that our homes have always been responding to something bigger than personal preference. Taste has never existed in a vacuum. It's shaped by economic conditions, technological change, collective anxiety, and the social pressures of being seen and understood by others. What's different now is the speed and visibility of that pressure. Where past generations signaled wealth through carved wood, matching furniture sets, or sheer excess, today we do it through perfectly imperfect aesthetics designed to survive an algorithm. Our homes are no longer reflections of just who we are. It's all about our identity, our class, and performance. And maybe the most radical thing we can do in an era of constant aesthetic judgment is to let our spaces be lived in, contradictory, and personal, even if they don't photograph perfectly. I hope you guys enjoyed my video today. I definitely enjoyed deep diving and doing research on this, so let me know if there are any topics that you'd like me to look more into in the future, and I'd be happy to do so. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of my future videos. I hope you all have a spooky week. Bye!